Hi! In this video, we're going to create a strange instrument to discover basic use of customizable formulas in the EAGANMATRIX. First, we will recreate the basic instrument that we created in the previous video, but by replacing the predefined formulas x, y, and z, respectively, with the customizable formulas a, b, and c. Then, by reversing their order or using them several times, we're going to create different instruments that present unusual links between gesture and sound. In order to make those tutorials useful for as many people as possible, I will refer whenever possible to instrument instead of continuum or osmose, and to interface instead of surface or keyboard. Customizable formulas contain 4 terms. Each one of them is based on one of the fundamental parameters returned by our instrument. The first parameter, W, is based on whether or not there's a contact with the interface. It has only one value. You define it with the red cursor by moving it, using the guides, or by increment. And finally, the second dot above allows us to multiply or divide W value by a power of 10. As a predefined formula, we have seen that W equals 1 when you touch the interface, 0 if you don't. In a customizable formula, by default, the W term is constant. It equals the value you define, whatever happens. When switched to gated mode, it reverts to the previous functionality. It then holds the defined value if the interface is touched, and 0 otherwise. W has several other operating modes. It's a very versatile parameter that can be used in many different ways, which will be the subjects of future videos. For now, let's leave it equal to 0. X, Y, and Z terms operate differently than W. Each one of them lets you define not one but 2 values. Do you remember the graphics linking an input gesture to an output value? That's exactly what those 3 addition squares represent. Gesture on the horizontal axis, and the output value on the vertical axis. It's up to us to define the link between them. In the X term, horizontally, we get the interface left-right axis. The left value is the one you want out when playing on the leftmost part of your instrument. Well, it's a little bit more complex than that, but you get the idea. We'll go into details later. You define this value the same way than W, by moving the cursor, with the guides or the arrows underneath. Let's define it to -1. The right value is the one you want out when playing on the rightmost part of your instrument. Let's define it to 1. Again, the second dot above allows us to choose the power of 10. Now that we have set the output value on both ends of the interface, we need to choose how it evolves between them. We do so thanks to the central dot that allows us to change the curve. By default, it is linear, but in a specific mode that converts the value to kHz, the standard unit for frequencies in the EAGANMATRIX. Thanks to this mode, it's enough to define x going from -1 to 1 to obtain the same behavior as predefined x, and a tonal distribution of pitches according to the black stripes or the keys. Later, we can avoid this conversion, modify the curve shape, and use the left-right axis for many other things than pitch. In the Y term, horizontally we get the front-back axis of the continuum and the aftertouch of the osmose. On the left, we define the value on the beginning of the travel, on the right, at the end of the travel. Tools to define them are the same. Here, we want Y to go from 0 to 1. So let's just set the right value to 1. As you can see, by default, the curve doesn't extend to the full movement range, which reproduces again the predefined formula behavior. On the beginning of the travel, Y stays at its first value, and it reaches its second value before the end of the travel. Later, we can modify this range by moving the cursors below. Finally, in the Z term, horizontally we get the pressure, maximum pressure being on the right side. When setting into 1, we see that by default, the curve is also the same one as that of predefined Z. Modifying values and curve shape is done the same way. With these three formulas A, B and C working like X, Y and Z, we can then easily reproduce our basic instrument. We just need to patch A to the frequency of the oscillator, B to the spectral content, and C to the output volume. Now that we know the basics of using formulas, we can start to imagine other links between gesture and sound. For example, let's replace the control of the timbre with formula C, the pressure. The Y-axis no longer impacts the sound, but we still get a rather intuitive behavior reminiscent of brass instruments. Playing louder enriches the timbre. If we find that the timbre becomes too aggressive, let's lower the maximum value of term Z. However, be careful, if we modify formula C directly, it will affect all the connection where this formula is used, including the output volume. We will then patch a new formula D to enrich the timbre more modestly, say by 50%. We then obtain almost the system preset Synth Brass, which despite its simplicity, is particularly pleasant to play. But why not allow the timbre to continue being enriched with Y, so that we can saturate the spectrum when we want? We now have an instrument whose timbre is controlled half by pressure and half by the Y-axis. To achieve a more unusual behavior, let's now link the frequency to the pressure as well. Obviously, it's impossible to play a tonal melody anymore, but we then get the sweep from 0 to 1 kHz, which we can imagine quite well being used as a base for a robot voice or a vinyl scratching emulation. Let's add a shift, thanks to the second direct plus row. We get the same sweep, 1 kHz higher, 2 kHz higher, and by creating a variable offset according to X, we can then start a conversation. One last example. Let's simply invert A and B relative to our original instrument. The frequencies are now along the Y-axis and the timbre evolves along the X-axis. For osmosists, as long as you don't reach aftertouch, no sound comes out since the frequency is 0 Hz. For continuumists, this corresponds to the front of the surface. To avoid this, let's restrict the frequencies to a small range in the subs, between 50 and 60 Hz for example. Let's add a long reverb, and we already obtain a simple but efficient riser effect. It's up to you to find the different ways to play with these patches, which will of course be different on Continuum and Osmose. The possibilities are numerous, even with just one oscillator and the 3 axes. However, be careful when changing the output formula. You could abruptly route a strong signal to your monitors. Get into the habit of lowering their volume when programming in the EAGANMATRIX. That's all for this video. I hope my explanations were clear. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Merci et à bientôt.